Hey guys, this is Tauna, and today we're going to be talking about budget commanders. These are commanders that can lead decks that are relatively budget. You can kind of chuck a whole lot of stuff that usually you wouldn't use in other decks. It's kind of like, mostly kind of bulk and stuff like that in there, and it's going to be decent. They're going to be decks that you can easily upgrade to be amazing. Don't get me wrong. Like, you can go through, you can replace some of the chaff and stuff like that you've got in there with some amazing creatures and everything, and kind of build it up bigger. But even with this kind of, the stuff that you got sitting around and stuff, you can build a decent deck with these ones, in my opinion. There's obviously going to be some that are not going to be on this deck, on this list here. You can, go and you can upgrade them a lot, or you can keep them weak and, well, not weak, you can keep them strong but cheap. There's lots of different ways you could potentially do this one. So the first one here we're going to talk about is Wiota, Joiner of Forces. She's a very, very interesting commander because of the way she works. Essentially, whenever you have a non-human attack, you get to look through the top 6 cards of your deck. You get to grab a human from it and put it onto the battlefield. So, you want to run like a mixture of humans and, good kind of non-humans ones. This is the kind of one that inspired me to make this video, because if you guys haven't seen, there is a deck list going around over here by Full Fat Mayo, which I love your name. $10 Wiota ultra budget deck, and honestly, looking at it, it is very budget. It's got some really nice creatures in here, some very low kind of CMC creatures, but also, a good mixture between non-humans and humans to be able to get some really nice stuff out of there. There's even got like a primer in here if you want to read through it to kind of learn a bit about the deck and stuff, like the strengths of the deck, important cards, the structure and stuff. So there's lots of different stuff. Even if, you read through it and want to decide on the way to build your own, there's lots of stuff there. But either way, Wiota, I think, kind of definitely takes one of the top key parts of this list, because she's just amazing. She's a very interesting card that you can build in a lot of different ways, which is really nice. Next up, we've got Kediss, the strategist. Now, this one is very interesting. Kediss essentially makes it so that all of your defenders are able to attack, as well as the fact that they will assign their combat damage equal to their toughness rather than their power. So from there, you can, play some really nice cards. We've got, for example, Hullclade, which has just came out. You've got a whole bunch of different walls, and, walls aren't really as kind of super meta or anything, so they tend to be relatively cheap. So you can build a lot of defender-based stuff with this. You can build a lot of, like, toughness-based stuff. There's some stuff that kind of buffs up the toughness of your creatures while not kind of buffing up their power. But from here, because you've got, they're assigning their damage as equal to their toughness rather than their power, you can kind of build it around those cards, which are very rarely used. Next up, we've got Feather the Redeemed. So the way she works is essentially, if you take an instant and sorcery, you cast it. If it targets a creature that you control, then you're going to exile that card, and then at the beginning of the next end step, you are going to put that back into your hand. So you can cycle through some really, really nice cards there that, aren't cards that you're necessarily going to be using otherwise, but you can get double value out of them because you're going to put them down, you're going to cast it, and then it's going to come back into your hand, which is really, really nice to be able to play some of those kind of weaker-ish kind of spell slinger cards that, because they're generally like a 1-for-1, they're not really all that great, but around Feather, they end up becoming, more value engines because you can kind of cycle through them. And then from obviously the fact that they come back into your hand, you can kind of customize your hand, keep the instants and sorceries that are really strong there, kind of get rid of some of the ones that aren't as strong. You can do some really nice stuff there. Next up, we've got Krenko, another kind of, big name budget character because of the fact that he just works with goblins. There is a lot of goblins throughout all the kind of sets. You've got a lot of kind of goblin stuff you can build up with here. There's more goblins coming out. You can build some really, really super budget stuff, like even like Skirk Prospector here, making it so you can sacrifice a goblin so you can get red. They're very cheap cards, but also cards that when you combine them with Krenko, you're just going to make an exponential amount of goblins. You start with a little single goblin, and then you've got, you know, 2 goblins, and that becomes 4, 8, 16. Boom, you've got 32 goblins with, you know, +1/+1 on them, because you've got like a goblin chieftain out or something like that to anthem them up. There's lots of really great stuff you could potentially do with Krenko, and you know, as soon as you add in something that kind of untaps him or something along those lines, like, you know, there's a whole bunch of utility artifacts that will untap and stuff. You've got, like, look at Sting. Sting's only $1.50. You can use that to untap him at the start of combat. You know, there's lots of really great kind of stuff you could potentially use in here to untap him, and then boom, you're just creating more and more goblins. All right, next up we've got Prosh, Sky Raider of Kerr. So you can basically, you know, use him to sacrifice all your stuff and then ping damage based on your sacrifices, because whenever you cast him, you're going to create a whole bunch of red kobolds. Red kobolds. You can use them to do a lot of stuff, and a lot of kind of, you know, buffing him up and stuff. You can sacrifice, you can get a whole bunch of tokens out, you can sacrifice those, you can buff up Prosh and just go for face damage with him. We've got Yuriko, the Tiger Shadow, bringing back ninjutsu and doing some really awesome stuff with ninjas there. You know, there's some more expensive kind of upgrades you could potentially do in there with like roaming throne and stuff, but there's also a whole bunch of relatively cheap ninjas that you can potentially use in here to be able to kind of, you know, fill out the deck, do a really cool kind of ninja tribal where you're bouncing stuff around with the ninjutsu and everything, getting a whole bunch of value from there. We've got Atla Palani. Atla Palani you can basically take, you can build her with as many big creatures as you've got, add some untap, you know, start sacrificing your eggs, you know, do that kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden you've just got a million different things out. It doesn't have to be dinosaurs either. Just take your Atla Palani, put like, you know, your dragons, put your big dinos. Like, look, there's worms here. You know, just any kind of big creatures you can potentially use in here. You know, you can add in something like Goblin Bombardment there to be able to deal damage with them. There's lots of really, really great stuff you could potentially run in this deck to just be able to get a whole bunch of value when you sacrifice out your, or, you know, whenever your eggs die, if you're blocking with them. We've got Kediss, Emberclaw Familiar, and then Malcolm, Keen Eye Navigator. Between the two of them, run them with whatever you want. You're going to be able to get so many treasures because of Malcolm and Kediss. You're going to be able to deal a lot of damage. You can run, you know, you can run some pirates with them. It's pirate tribal. You can run, you know, just treasure-based stuff. There's a lot of really great kind of value stuff that you can add in that's relatively cheap. That's not going to get a huge amount of kind of value anywhere else. Like, look, Ingenious Artillerist here. Whenever one or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, deal that much damage to each opponent. You're going to be creating a lot of artifacts between Malcolm and Kediss, like, you know, Kediss spreading out the damage there. And then whenever your pirates deal damage, so Kediss activating Malcolm, making Malcolm deal 3 damage to each opponent, and then from there you're creating 3 treasures. You know, you can go with a lot of different stuff in here to be able to do it. You know, just add in like a Magda or something like that, so that way you get to sacrifice and then look through, and you know, there's lots of really, really interesting stuff that you can potentially do with this deck. And as I said, relatively budget. You can add a lot of different stuff in here to kind of buff them up, or, you know, use the treasures and stuff, but make use of the kind of bulk that you've got there. Next is Miram. Now you're probably thinking, Tauna, what the fuck? Miram is not a budget commander. That's because everyone who's running Miram is using like the big kind of expensive dragons, just like myself. And I will say that I'm running the big expensive dragons, but there is a lot of kind of dragons in here that aren't as expensive that you can potentially run. You know, like Coalescer here, making it so you can play the dragons off the top of your deck, 35 cents there. You've got stuff like Thrakus here, doubling the power for 39 cents. There is a lot of really, really great dragons out there. And then there's a lot of kind of mid-tier dragons that you could potentially use in your Miram because they're not as expensive. You know, like Skulled Nurturer here is a dragon. You can just get green. Earthquake Dragon's not too expensive, able to run it. You know, there's lots of really great stuff that you can potentially run with this. And, you know, you have a look at Miram and you'll see the expensive dragons, like, you know, Terra, you've got Old Gnawbone. But, you know, all the Goldspan dragons, the what are they? The Elder Dragons and stuff like that. But then you've got lots of really cheap choices as well that you can potentially run in Miram, and then just slowly upgrade it if you want to, or just keep it as a kind of, you know, a relatively middle of the run kind of Miram deck that people get caught off guard by because you're not running the huge dragons. Then our final one here is going to be Zada, Hedron Grinder. So, you know, you can use Zada whenever you cast an instant or sorcery that is going to target Zada. It's going to get copied onto each of your creatures you control that the spell could target. Each copy targets a different one. So you can target him with a buff, and then all of a sudden you're buffing up your whole board. So there's a lot of like different red cards, especially, that are going to be like, you know, Ed Dreadmaul's Ear here, +2/+2, and then it gains trample, and then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, destroy target artifact. You can do that. You can cast it on Zada, and then you can spread it out to all your other goblins. Goblins is probably the best way to play this because you're going to be able to flood the board with 1 million goblins. But then from there, you can potentially, you know, you could take it in so many different directions if you didn't want to go with goblins. But goblins just are the way that you can get a whole bunch of things out onto the board that you can then, you know, cast this Ancestral Aid and Ancestor's Aid, and then from there you cast it on the one Zada, and then all of a sudden you've cast it on all 10 of your goblins, and then you're getting 10 treasures. You get buffing them all up by +2, and then you're getting first strike on all of them as well. You know, there's just a huge amount of stuff on there. Roaming Throne, making it so that this gets doubled as well. That's crazy. I didn't even think about that. Why do I need Roaming Throne in every single one of my decks? Anyway, that's my list for today. Wiota, Kediss, Feather, Krenko, Prosh. We've got Yuriko at La Palani. We've got Kediss. We've got Miram, and then we've got Zada. This is obviously not a very exhaustive list. This is a list that I've made myself. If you guys have other ones, let me know down in the comments. I want to hear what budget decks you guys have. You know, I'm talking like less than 50 US, less than 100 US, whatever budget you've got. The more budget and the stronger it is, let us know. This freaking $10 Wiota deck is bonkers. I'll put the link to that down in the comments, and I'll also ask you guys go over, subscribe. We're at 883 subscribers. Let's hit 1,000 by the end of February. I hope you guys had a wonderful day, and goodbye.